What if I told you that McLaren not only has the faster car of 2025, but hides an almost invisible trick that has unleashed a storm in the FIA? How does your hidden system work in the brakes, and why are your rivals furious? Today we reveal everything. The data was not less. In 2025, Pirelli tires have been especially sensitive. With tougher compounds and greater abrasion tolerance, the challenge for engineers focused even more on maintaining thermal energy under control without losing performance. The teams faced two constant problems: the overheating that destroys the gums in long batches and the excessive cooling that the grip compromises in exit laps or after a safety car. McLaren, however, did not seem affected. Their stints were stable, their return times did not decline, and their pilots never complained about lack of grip or graining. The first team to sound the alarm was Red Bull. After being overcome by the rhythm of McLaren even in conditions that historically favored them, they began a technical espionage work during boxes. They used thermal cameras to observe the rear wheels of the MCL39, and what they found was disconcerting. While most cars showed intensely hot areas around the brake drums, the McLaren had abnormally cold points in that same area. This not only suggested an unusual heat absorption, but also a potential hidden system that was interfering with the traditional thermal balance of the car. These images were presented informally to the paddock, and soon they reached the hands of the FIA. What followed was a series of covert inspections during parc ferme and intense surveillance in the following rounds. The decisive moment came after McLaren's double in Miami. The FIA decided to open a formal investigation, focusing on the set of brake drums, wheel charging, and any possible cooling system. The technical regulation of Formula One, in its Article 11.5, explicitly prohibits any brake cooling system that uses liquids or active mechanisms. The suspicion was that McLaren had found a way to surround this point without violating it directly. 4 days, infrared scans, material tests, and analysis of internal geometries of the drums were performed. All this without the British team issuing a single official statement. What caught the attention of the inspectors was not a visible structure or an unusual wiring, but precisely the opposite: the complete absence of typical components of a thermal control system. McLaren had hidden his advantage not behind software or valve, but within the most basic physics, forced the technical commissioners to reinterpret their own regulatory limits. This moment marked a before and after. It was not if McLaren was cheating. The question was now if they had crossed an invisible line in the regulation. And more importantly, if that line had been crossed with sufficient technical intelligence to force FIA to redefine what it is and what is not legal in terms of thermal management. The entire paddock was in suspense, with rival engineers recognizing in private that what McLaren had achieved was not a simple technical triquiñuela, but a masterpiece of applied engineering. When FIA finally published its official technical report after thoroughly examining Oscar Piastri's MCL39, what they revealed left all grid engineers with a mixture of amazement, admiration, and frustration. The key to the mysterious thermal performance of McLaren did not reside in a prohibited component or in an active system, but in an elegantly passive solution: phase change materials, also known as PCM. A silent, almost invisible, but colossal impact innovation. PCM are not new in the scientific world. They have been used in aerospace applications, thermal architecture, and electronic systems where it is required to manage heat energy efficiently. The revolutionary in the case of McLaren is how they adapted this technology to an environment as hostile as that of a Formula brake drum one. Instead of applying forced ventilation or changing the geometric design, Woking engineers inserted metal microtubes into the drum structure. These tubes, from the thickness of a needle, contain alloys that melt at very precise temperatures, between 120 and 200 degrees Celsius. The physical principle is simple but brilliant. When the heat generated by the brake system exceeds that threshold, the alloys change from solid to liquid, absorbing a significant amount of thermal energy without raising its own temperature. Indeed, they act as integrated ice cubes that melt without boiling, stabilizing the temperature without cooling externally. And most importantly, they do it without human intervention, without sensors, without software, without moving parts. Totally passive. Totally legal. This transforms the brake drum into a natural thermal shock absorber. Instead of irradiating heat directly to the tire and then to the tire as normally occurs, excess energy is retained in the system itself. The rear tires, which are usually the most sensitive to the accumulation of heat for long batches or after a phase of safety car, remain inside the performance window without the need to force the pilot to modify their driving style. This explains why Norris and Piastri could maintain consistent rhythms after return while other pilots suffered a sudden degradation or graining. This advantage not only improved the career rhythm, he also transformed the management of the box's strategy. McLaren could extend his steins beyond the expected, minimizing risks in undercuts or overcuts. His tactical margin was expanded, something that in Formula One modern can decide a championship. The rivals began to notice that McLaren was more benefited than anyone in races with sudden temperature changes, such as Australia, or with mixed conditions such as the Miami GP. The car always seemed ready, always prepared, always in temperature. Technically, what McLaren achieved is a redefinition of the concept of operating window of the tires. While the other equipment tried to adapt to it by adjusting motor maps, aerodynamic charges and pressures, McLaren directly altered the thermal environment without touching the tire. It is as if they changed the weather without touching the thermometer. This radical and effective idea has forced the FIA to study not only if PCM can be considered part of the brake system that is strictly regulated, but also if it would open the door to other similar applications. In the background, it is a philosophical evolution. Where F1 used to seek performance through visible and aggressive components, now the future seems to bow to invisible innovations, of physical nature rather than mechanical. And that completely changes the pitch for all teams that want to stay competitive without breaking the rules. The validation of the McLaren thermal management system by the FIA not only settled one of the most intriguing technical controversies in recent years, he also detonated a series of implications that are redrawing the competitive map of Formula One in real time. Although the Federation determined that the materials with phase change do not violate the current technical regulations, the decision has left open a deep injury between the teams, a precedent that could radically transform the development approach in the Queen category. To begin, the immediate reaction of the rivals was skepticism and concern. Red Bull, Mercedes and Ferrari, all with elite technical departments, have had to face the reality that they were overcome not by a visible piece, but by an idea. A hidden, minimalist solution without moving parts, which solves one of the most complex problems of modern competition: thermal management. In a sport where the tenths of the second are negotiated through simulations of millions of euros, wind tunnels and test benches, the idea that McLaren has found a silent, secret weapon has forced everyone to revalue their most basic concepts. Christian Horner did not hesitate to qualify the system as a creative lagoon in the regulation. Toto Wolff, more reserved, acknowledged that what McLaren had done was brilliant but dangerous, because if it is not legislated, it could become an engineering career where the limits of the passive and the active become impossible to define. Even in Ferrari, internally there was talk of a borderline engineering philosophy, that which sails right on the edge between the allowed and the forbidden, and that so many times in the history of the F1 has generated championships and sanctions. From the point of view of the FIA, the decision to declare legal the system was technical but not political. In fact, sources close to the agency indicated that it is already working on a possible reformulation of Article 11.5 of the technical regulation, to clearly specify what types of materials, state transformations and thermal manipulations may be considered legal from 2026. This could imply a retroactive prohibition or at least a clearer delimitation on the use of phase change materials or other similar mechanisms. In parallel, the technical departments of all teams have started a kind of hidden career for understanding and replicating or counteracting the McLaren solution. Some have already begun to experiment with alternative PCMs, but others go further. They analyze how to apply this passive logic in other areas of the car, from the battery to the gearbox. This chain reaction could trigger a silent revolution in the design of the cars, where the physics of materials retakes prominence about electronics or aerodynamics. On the competitive level, McLaren has capitalized its innovation with mastery. Lando Norris leads the pilot championship consistency, and Oscar Piastri has emerged as the ideal, reliable and fast partner. With each Grand Prix, its strategic advantage is extended, not so much by an overwhelming superiority, but for the operational stability offered by this system. In a year where the weather, the tire strategies and decisions of safety car are playing a key role, having the ability to predict and control the thermal behavior of your car is almost like playing with marked cards. But, as in every story of innovation in Formula One, the clock runs against the pioneer. As the rivals discover the logic behind the PCM and the engineers explore their own interpretations, McLaren's advantage could wane as fast as it appeared. Hence, the real challenge is not simply to defend what they already have, but to continue evolving. Andrea Stella and her team know. Therefore, they are already testing new complementary solutions, small improvements that, together, can build the second great act of this technological narrative. What is clear is that this season will not only be decided by pure speed or by track maneuvers. It will be decided in laboratories, in the wind tunnels, and in reading between the lines of the technical regulations. And in that field, McLaren has proven not one, but several steps ahead. Even more shocking if we connect it with the historical lineage of innovations that have shaken Formula One in other ages. Deep in this context will not only amplify the perception of what McLaren has achieved, but will also allow the audience to understand that this discipline, more than a simple speed competition, is a silent war of technical intelligence, of interpretation of rules in advance of change. This expansion should not only be technical, show how other teams reacted, how FIA had to improvise regulatory responses, how even pilots became pieces within this high-level engineering game.